On this special episode of Trailblazer 2 Traveler, we're going to talk about none other than the Trailblazer themselves. Trailblazer currently has 3 unique forms. Naturally, we can only cover one at a time, and I actually want to cover the Harmony Trailblazer for this video. Break Effect has seen some interesting development in the meta during Penacony's story arc, and it's a mechanic I've been closely associating with elemental reactions. One of their mechanics has been Super Break, and in Genshin, it'd be something like a super reaction. So now, we get to explore some ideas on what it would look like in-game. How does it affect damage numbers, and what other bonuses can we get from this new mechanic? I hope you guys enjoyed this video because I put a lot of work into this. Disclaimers, timestamps, social media links, and music credits are all down below. Without further ado, let's get started. Let's start off by using this as an opportunity to explain what a super reaction might be in Genshin. In Star Rail, Super Break works under 2 conditions. 1. The enemy needs to be weakness broken. 2. The character needs an ability that enables super breaks. This can be through personal enabling like with Firefly and Boothill, or through Harmony MC, who can enable the entire party to do this. For Genshin, my take on super reactions is that we remove the first requirement altogether. I initially considered things like elemental shield breaking, staggering, or stunning enemies in order for them to be considered weakness broken, but that's a very inconsistent mechanic altogether. On top of that, the whole point of Super Break characters is that only they can enable the effect. It's already pretty limited as it is, so for this transition we don't need a second factor involved. I want to use Nilou as a prime example because she'll be one of our references for super reactions. Her kit revolves around altering the properties of Bloom, allowing it to perform much better compared to its original counterpart. It's also something only Nilou can enable, putting her in line as a specialized super reaction unit. Next, we should cover the actual properties of super reactions. A universal bonus will be that every super reaction has a percent bonus based on the triggering unit's elemental damage bonus. And this bonus will generally be based on their element, not the element of the reaction's damage. For example, a Dendro unit with 60% Dendro damage gains a 60% bonus for Bloom, Quicken, and Burning. In Burning's case, it deals pyro damage. If Emily triggers it, it increases based on her Dendro damage bonus. If a pyro user like Xiangling triggers it, it increases based on her pyro damage bonus. There's also special cases to this scaling. Shatter is a physical damage reaction, so it will be increased based on the user's own elemental damage, in addition to their physical damage. Swirl deals elemental damage based on what it absorbs, so that will be increased based on anemo damage and the elemental damage of the absorbed element. So if Kazuha has a 15% anemo damage bonus and a 15% pyro damage bonus, Swirling Pyro is increased by 30% total. Same thing with Crystallize. The shield gains a buff based on bonuses of geo damage and the infused element's damage bonus. There are also specific properties involved with super reactions itself. Amplifying and quicken reactions, however, have no special properties. These are already personal damage focused, and a percent bonus of these reactions is much higher than that of a transformative reaction. A Pyro Damage Goblet alone would increase Melt and Vaporize by 46.6%, which is around the equivalent of 300 EM, and that's more than enough for an amplifying super reaction buff. Transformative reactions will benefit the least from the damage bonuses, especially since most reaction characters scale on EM instead of damage bonus stats. But to compensate, every transformative reaction will gain a significant buff to their properties. As mentioned before, Nilou will be a prime example of a super reactor, but I'm going to make her kit function a bit differently from Bloom's super reaction. The main differences are these. 1. While Nilou's Bountiful Cores will explode almost immediately, Super Blooms explode after 2 seconds. This still allows the team to detonate cores at a faster rate, preventing Kave's issues of wasting the cores, but it will tie into my second difference. 2. While Nilou's Bountiful Cores cannot react with Electro or Pyro, Super Bloom cores can. This will allow us to explore super reactions for Hyper Bloom and Burgeon. I'm not going to keep going down the list for every reaction's super properties, because I want to keep those a surprise. It's also not that important to know the specific bonuses for this video, since Harmony MC is just a general introduction to the mechanic. I'll reveal my own takes on super reactions in future videos, and for the time being, you are more than welcome to give your own list on what each super reaction might do. It's open season with this, so get creative and go crazy with it. Let's cover Harmony Trailblazer's kit now. They will be renamed as Dendro Trailblazer, and I figured the element made sense since it's a very reaction-focused element. Their weapon will be a catalyst, and design-wise the signature should naturally be the hat. Their stats in Genshin will be 201 attack, 985 defense, and 11,414 HP. And when it comes to their Ascension stat, I'm going to partially follow mechanics similar to Traveler. Trailblazer will utilize 4-star Ascension scaling despite being considered a 5-star. Unlike Traveler, who is hard stuck at a 24% attack bonus, Trailblazer's Ascension set will be different depending on their element, since their kits are a lot more centered around specific stat scalings. For this Dendro variant, they will have a 96 EM Ascension stat. Let's start off with the basic attacks. The damage isn't going to be mentioned here since Trailblazer is more of an off-field support. However, I thought it would be fun to discuss my idea on the visuals for the normal attacks. Trailblazer will fire out Dendro Bolts which hit an opponent and bounce back to them, and from there Trailblazer can chain attacks. If the Trailblazer has their special weapon, which is the hat, they'll instead throw out their hat, which bounces between the Trailblazer and enemies. It's a bit of a special interaction with the weapon, since I wanted the animation to have a bit of flair to it. If you're wondering where the idea of a bouncing attack came from, it's because I've been maining Invisible Woman a lot in Marvel Rivals. Shout out to my fellow strategist mains, by the way. Onto their skill, Trailblazer throws their Watchmaker's hat in the air, which shoots out Coney Coins at set intervals. Coney Coins deal Dendro damage and can fire out every 2 seconds. While the Watchmaker's hat is active, reactions being triggered by any character will regenerate energy for the Trailblazer. This instance of energy regen can occur a total of 3 times. One hat can be present on the field at a time. The duration of this ability will be 10 seconds, which means we get 5 Coney Coins fired. This simulates the damage of Trailblazer's original skill, since a damage multiplier is a 5-hit combo. For its cooldown, it'll be 12 seconds. At level 8, each damage instance deals 44% attack, making the total multiplier 220% attack. Every instance of energy regen is 8.8, allowing for a total of 26.4 energy per skill cast. Each hit generates 1 Dendro particle, equaling a total of 5 generated per skill cast. Finally, the ICD is a standard 3-hit or 2.5 seconds. Because a shot fires every 2 seconds, it likely means you can only apply Dendro every other hit or every 4 seconds, making them noticeably slower compared to other units. Trailblazer's Burst is where you get to have some more fun. They'll summon Clocky, which grants all allies the Backup Dancer effect, lasting for 15 seconds. Allies with the Backup Dancer effect have their Elemental Mastery increased, and can now trigger super reactions for its duration. At level 8, they grant a 72% EM bonus, which is based on the 26% break effect bonus on their original talent. It has a 20-second cooldown and an 80 cost burst. The main utility, just like in HSR, is a Trailblazer's activation of super reaction effects for your party. Given that they're a Dendro unit, it means you'll likely want to focus on Bloom, Quicken, or Burning related reactions. But as we already know, there's a lot of variance to these reaction teams, so even the non-Dendro reactions like Freeze, Electrocharge, or Swirl can be options to mess around with. Let's move on to their A1 passive. Their A4 Trace talks about toughness reduction, and their A6 focuses on action delay. So I'm gonna take this as a chance to make the passive a free card instead. And for this, I'll make so that Trailblazer's skill hits gain a base damage bonus equal to 220% of their EM. While the point of the skill is to have Trailblazer focus on utility over damage, 44% attack is way too low. 220% isn't going to be a massive amount of damage, but it will be sizable enough to where Trailblazer can contribute more than just tickle damage on the enemy. And this bonus is in line with other Dendro units who also focus on reactions, since they also dual scale in EM stats. For the Trailblazer's A4, it'll be based on their A2 Trace. All transformative super reaction damage is increased by 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60% when there are 5+, 4, 3, 2, or 1 enemies on the field. Amplifying and Quicken reactions will instead receive 50% of these bonuses. The passive just plays around with the idea of buffing super reaction damage. The less enemies on the field, the stronger the damage, which balances out Horde versus boss content. Because Amplifying and Quicken have a strong advantage with damage percent bonuses, I felt that nerfing the numbers for those was a fair move. Overall, Dendro Trailblazer's kit is as a general Dendro support, with the additional super reaction mechanic being unlocked. We'll cover the intricacies of super reactions later on, but for now let's focus on Trailblazer's best builds. For artifact stats, you have a couple options. First, you could run them as a sub DPS, focusing on attack or EM on the sands. EM will generally be preferred. At the same time, depending on your weapon choice, ER requirements are going to be pretty high. So if you go for any sort of non-ER weapon, then an ER sands is basically a must. Then go for Dendro damage on the Goblet and crit on the Circlet. Their C4 will provide an EM bonus based on their own EM, so it's very possible you'll choose to instead run a full EM build to maximize that potential. The bonus itself won't be that high, so I don't think it's the best option, but for an easy build then it will be viable. For their best sets, the general options are going to be Deepwood and Gilded. Deepwood is going to be a good Dendro support option, helping with Dendro DPSs or Bloom teams, but if your team already has a Deepwood user, then Gilded works for its attack and EM bonuses. Trailblazer scales on both, allowing them to have higher overall damage, whether it be personal or reaction based. Other sets like Noblesse and Tenacity work well for their 4-piece effect, because it's easy to trigger and maintain the bonuses. But for both of these sets, Trailblazer doesn't make much use of the 2-piece effects. Their burst doesn't deal damage at all, and they don't scale on HP. Looking at weapons, we have classic damage weapons with attack percent or crit stats. These are pretty standard, so I'm going to skip this one. EM weapons can play a good role when we look into more supportive capabilities. For free-to-play options, Emerald Orb provides an attack bonus when triggering most Hydra-related reactions, but since Trailblazer is Dendro here, it may not be as easy to proc. Mappa Mare gives a damage bonus when triggering reactions. Its downside is the fact that you can only proc it while on field. Magic Guide increases damage against Hydro or Electro-affected enemies. It's viable in a Bloom or Quicken team, but in Bloom teams, it's very possible for Dendro Auras to overtake the enemy, making it less likely to have the effect active. 4-star gachas include Sacrificial Fragments, providing the highest EM substat for a 4-star weapon. But since most of Trailblazer's attacks happen off-field, it's unlikely to trigger immediately. The other option is Wandering Evenstar. While it's limited to the weapon banner, this is still a good option since it converts EM to attack. It also grants a partial attack bonus for the rest of the party. For 5-star options, Starcaller's Watch is able to increase EM by 365, but they aren't able to proc the shield-based effect. With Trailblazer being an EM scaling Catalyst user, 1000 Floating Dreams will be the best option overall. It's able to increase their EM, elemental damage, as well as providing the rest of the party a slight EM bonus. It's able to increase their EM, elemental damage, as well as providing the rest of the party a slight EM bonus. Moving on to the idea of using ER weapons, these also might be recommended to better adjust to Trailblazer's energy needs. Fruit of Fulfillment has a passive that decreases attack, but increases EM. This can be useful since EM is a better scaling for them, but the attack debuff still means somewhat lower damage than other weapons. The other weapon would be Favonius Codex. This catalyst will be a great option for team energy, and investing in some crit rate will be a good option to ensure lower ER needs across the board. Next up, let's look at a signature weapon idea. Since Trailblazer doesn't have their own special light cones, I want to take it as a chance to have free reign over its stats. I'm going to make it a 4-star weapon, since Trailblazer is intended to be a free character, and the weapon should be just as accessible. This catalyst will be called Watchmaker's Legacy. It's going to have a 510 base attack and a 165 EM substat. Upon casting an elemental burst, all party members gain a 6 to 12 elemental damage bonus based on each party member's own element. Characters who share the same element will stack the corresponding damage bonus. Each element can stack up to 2 times, and this can last up to 12 seconds. This kind of weapon is a great tool for general damage buffing. The requirements are simple to achieve as you only require 2 characters of the same element in order to maximize its bonus, and it doesn't even have to be the weapon user. For Trailblazer in particular, this weapon will be especially powerful, since super reactions are buffed based on elemental damage bonuses, so being able to use this allows for teammates to double dip in their stats. It will be especially good in amplifying or quicken focus characters. When it comes to other users, any catalyst will be a decent choice simply because the passive is universally accessible, but EM scalers will have a leg up due to the substat. For DPS units, characters like Yanfei Yai can use a substat to boost their reactions, in addition to an easy damage percent bonus. Meanwhile, supports like Nahida and Sucrose can use it to boost their team's damage output, while still being able to utilize both bonuses. With the build stuff done, let's get an idea of Trailblazer's numbers, and we can see where they stand with the initial conversion values. Starting off, let's look at energy needs. Following the conversions, they're valued as an 80 energy unit, which means a higher cost overall. Since they generate most of their particles off-field, this also negatively impacts their ER requirements. For all of these examples, I assume they only catch one of their Dendro particles and everything else is caught off-field. If you're running them in solo Dendro, their ER will be around 220 to 250%. Double Dendro teams are much more forgiving, averaging around 170 to 200%. These are the teams Trailblazer will likely want to be in, both for energy and general synergies. Finally, if you ever consider a triple Dendro team, the requirements seem to be 140 to 150, making it super easy to generate particles. These are just the general example I came up with for teams. As usual, catching more particles on field using Favonius or running certain battery units will reduce these costs. As a quick comparison, I'll showcase the energy related weapons, so you can see how good or bad Trailblazer's energy needs get with certain choices. We'll just look at their signature alongside Favonius and Wine and Song. Since the signature weapon doesn't use an ER stat, it will require it from other sources to compensate. Meanwhile, on its own, Favonius reduces energy cost by around 23 points, and a 30.6 ER weapon like Wine and Song reduces it by 13 points. All in all, if you're going to run an EM based weapon, you'll need to run an ER Sans. Next up, let's look at what Trailblazer's personal damage will look like. First, we'll compare artifact main stats with a full EM support build and a Dendro damage build. we'll assume a double Dendro team for the EM buff, along with their signature weapon and Deepwood. It's also going to use super reactions, so any Dendro damage bonus they have results in higher spread damage. And from the numbers, the DPS build is going to be around 70% better than a full EM build. For the next part, we'll compare artifact sets of Deepwood and Gilded. Same factors, but we'll just assume a damage build for the main stats. Surprisingly, Deepwood is around 20% better, and I assume the main reason is that Trailblazer has a lot of sources for EM stats already, so the buffs they get from Gilded have diminishing returns. Meanwhile, Deepwood's Dendro damage bonus double dips into Super Spread, and the Dendro resistance shred really helps widen that gap. When deciding between two Dendro units, running Deepwood on Trailblazer will likely take priority over the other. Next, we'll look at weapon comparisons. Let's first compare the signature with other 4-star options. For this listing, I looked at Fruit of Fulfillment for a craftable option, Sacrificial for a free-to-play gacha, and Wandering Evenstar for a limited gacha. Watchmaker's Legacy is going to be around 18% better than Fruit, 15% better than Sacrificial, and 16% better than Evenstar. This kind of result was a bit expected because of the double dipping for super reactions. Next up, we'll compare the signature with 5-star weapons to see if it's competitive with those. I'll use Lost Prayer as a standard 5-star option, and assuming they're on field, getting stacked shouldn't affect their overall stats. We'll take the average of 3 stacks in a rotation, which is around a 12% damage bonus overall. Then I'll use Starcaller for a general EM boost, and then the Thousand Floating Dreams for the EM and damage buffs. The calculations show that Watchmaker is around 2% better than Lost Prayer, 7% better than Starcaller, and 5% worse than a Thousand Floating Dreams. And all of these results make sense. While Lost Prayer is a strong weapon for damage percent bonuses, it's a ramping up bonus, so you won't see significant buffs until the latter part of your field time. Also, you need to be on field, which results in limited team flexibility. Starcaller is just an EM stat stick, but a Thousand Floating Dreams provides meaningful buffs for units with high usage for EM and damage percent stats. It's also off-field friendly, which is Trailblazer's main role. That's all for their personal damage. Next, let's take a look at how well super reactions work on other units. For these examples, we assume Trailblazer's burst is active and that they use their signature weapon for an elemental damage bonus. We'll also take into account the A4 passive 60% transformative and 30% amplifying/quicken bonuses. Starting off, Mualani will showcase the Vaporize increase, since her role falls under amplifying reactions. The left column shows the damage output of her without super reactions being involved, and the right side is a super reaction version. Her only sources of hydro damage is in the goblet and the weapon bonus, and this causes her Vaporize damage to be around 50% higher. For Quicken, I'll use Yai as our example. Her aggravate skill damage is increased by around 30%, which isn't as high as the amplifying reactions, but Quicken units are generally better at faster application, making their rate of reacting overall faster. It's also important to remember that when looking at percentage comparisons, higher base multipliers make Quicken bonuses feel less impactful. For example, the burst aggravate buff is only 15% better with the super buff, so it really depends on how EM reliant each ability is. For a transformative reaction showcase on a low EM unit, we'll use Arlecchino Overload since she has good pyro damage sources. Damage percent bonuses on reactions have lower impact when the unit's EM is higher, but since Arlecchino mainly wants EM and substats, the difference in overload damage is a lot higher, being around 95% better with the super reaction buff. But let's say you build her specifically for overload. Higher EM stats cause the bonus to only be around 20% better. Next up, I'll use a Sucrose Swirl to showcase some of the full potentials of transformative reactions. When she triggers a Super Swirl, the reaction will have the previously mentioned property effect, allowing it to make up for the lower damage difference. As for that damage difference, it'll be around 25% higher than usual. This is because, as I mentioned before, Swirl takes into account damage bonuses from animal damage and the element that is being swirled. When Trailblazer uses their weapon in, say, a double electro comp, Sucrose gains 24% electro damage bonus and a 12% animal damage bonus. On top of that, her Ascension stat is 24% animal damage, and her C6 runs another 20% electro damage when her burst absorbs the element. In terms of super swirling, she has a lot of great sources to improve that mechanic. But let's take it a step further. As we know, aggravated swirls are a thing. Super aggravate was shown earlier, super swirl was shown just now, so super aggravated swirls exist. We follow the same pattern, but since Sucrose is Anemo, the rules state that Quicken is only increased based on her Anemo damage and cannot utilize electro bonuses. I was expecting the multi-dipping effect to cause the bonus to really ramp up, but surprisingly, it's also around 25% higher than a regular aggravated swirl. What I like about these results is that things generally balance out in the transformative category. Units who focus on reaction damage, such as Kuki, will build high EM with little to no elemental damage bonuses. This creates an already high damage floor, but the super reactions don't benefit as much, causing only a slightly higher damage ceiling. Units who specialize in personal damage run low EM and high elemental damage bonuses. So we see a lower floor, but higher gaps to the ceiling. This is apparent in teams such as Overload, Electrocharge, or Burning. And after considering how the numbers are affected, we can use that information to balance out whatever property changes occur. We'll cover some of these ideas in future videos. For now, let's go into constellations. C1 is based on their E1, where Trailblazer gets a skill point refunded after using it for the first time. For the Genshin version, Trailblazer gets 1 extra charge of their skill. Recasting their skill while the hat is active just repositions and refreshes the duration. Considering their rotations are mainly 20 plus seconds, you could utilize the extra charge by weaving in a second skill proc in the middle of your rotation. This allows Trailblazer to have higher uptime on their skill, resulting in more particles and sustained Dendro application. Having double the uptime basically just means double the overall damage. The original E2 increases Trailblazer's ERR by 25% for 3 turns after the battle started. So for Genshin, after Trailblazer triggers an elemental reaction, or when enemies take bloom damage, their ER is increased by 25% for 10 seconds. This is nice to lower the ER stats needed in artifacts or weapons. It's worth around 3 or 4 rolls in substats, and now those can go into things like EM or crit. The 2 variants to proc the bonus are there for consistency. In Quicken and Burning, triggering reactions should be easy pickings. In Bloom teams, however, you're usually running a Dendro Aura with a Hydro trigger. This means it'll be harder for Trailblazer to trigger Bloom and the ER buff by proxy. For C3, we'll increase Trailblazer's skill by 3 levels. This increases their personal damage as well as the flat energy regen effect. Because the talent increases the attack scaling of the ability, it doesn't provide much in terms of personal damage, and the effect is only a 1% difference in damage. The overall energy costs are a little better now, resulting in 5 less energy needed to be generated in particles. Their ER increased the party's break effect by 15% of Trailblazer's break stat. This was a universal bonus that occurred all the time, but for the Genshin version, we'll give it a slight limitation. So instead of the burst being active at all times, it will just be an extension of Trailblazer's burst. So they buff the team's EM by a flat amount, plus 15% of their own EM stat, only during the burst duration. This constellation serves to further improve the party's various EM stats. And when I previously mentioned the full EM build option, it was mainly to address when Trailblazer is at C4 or above. If we look at the calculations, a general damage build gives around 90 EM, while a full EM one grants around 150. It's overall not a huge difference, but the option is there for those who want to focus on support functions. At C5, Trailblazer's burst is increased by 3 levels. The only thing this increases is the flat EM bonus, equaling a 96 bonus instead of the original 72. Because this increase is a flat bonus, it will contribute slightly to the C4's EM sharing, albeit only around 3 or 4 points more. For their C6, the original is that Trailblazer's skill deals an additional 2 hits of damage. In Star Rail, this just means a 7-hit combo instead of 5, and in Genshin, the skill would last a bit longer to account for the extra hits. Since the C1's extra charge already provides pseudo-extension benefits, this bonus will act a bit differently. When unlocking C6, Trailblazer's skill will fire out 2 mini Koni coins every time it fires out its main coin. These mini coins deal 40% of Trailblazer's attack, plus a 220 EM from their A1 passive. When it comes to their Dendro application, a mini coin shares ITD with the skill's usual shots. In single target, the 3-hit ITD becomes much more relevant, since each skill shot now fires 3 at a time, making Dendro application occur every shot instead of every other shot. In AoE combat, ITD is separated by entity, so the extra coins provide better AoE coverage, which still results in better application. This fixes the initial issue of Trailblazer's low application, and it also provides a decent increase in their damage output. For the calculations, it's over double its original damage compared to C5. Finally, let's discuss some team comps. Trailblazer's super mechanic will create very interesting archetypes that can improve a variety of playstyles. As I go down the list, I'll try my best to include the sub-variants that will utilize this special bonus. Starting off, Quicken teams will see very good value, since the elemental damage bonuses will double dip into Quicken and personal damage scalings. It's also going to be one of the better options for Trailblazer's own damage. On that subset, Quick Bloom utilizes a similar bonus, but with Hyper Bloom being a secondary result of the team. Silent teams will see a nice balanced increase, since he has access to gear with electro damage, and this will increase his Hyper Bloom and aggravate output. Anima units can make good use of this, as shown earlier with the Sucrose Swirl examples. In Kazuha's case, his elemental damage buff can branch out to improve on the super reaction damage, making him shine a bit more as a pseudo reaction buffer. Characters like Venti or Sucrose who specialize in quick swirls will have better personal output when Trailblazers on the team. For Bloom-based teams, including the Hyper Bloom and Burgeon variants, you likely won't see much damage improvement, since these teams are purely EM focused. However, we've established Super Bloom will be similar to Nilou, where the cores explode much faster, allowing for comfier playstyles even in a non-Nilou comp. Super Hyper Bloom and Burgeon will have some kind of property change to their respective reactions, which still makes these teams synergize with Trailblazer. The Burning reaction will see some higher damage output, since characters like Emily and Kanish can buff it through their Dendro damage bonuses. Then, we'll have its special effect to make it interact differently with enemies. While the Burning reaction itself isn't that interesting, its sub-variants are. Trailblazer and Burn Vape can utilize the super reaction to buff Vaporize by a significant margin. Alternatively, Electro can create overloads, and if your unit is more focused on elemental damage instead of EM, the difference in the reaction will be a lot more noticeable. Also, super overloads have the property buff. Finally, a Cryo unit can work to create Burn Melt. Similarly to Vaporize, these units get a nice damage bonus from super melts. On that note with Cryo units, a Dendro unit like Trailblazer can still find its place in these teams. Running them in Freeze creates a Fridge comp, which will buff the Bloom and Freeze reaction. We know of Bloom's general changes, but Freeze is still up in the air. I have ideas on where we could take this, one of the bonuses being that Freeze actually does damage now. Having a Claymore unit like Fremine or Chang'e creates Super Shatters, which will scale on elemental and physical damage. This means that even in low EM scenarios, their personal damage will still contribute to the reaction. Same thing holds true for Geo units who can also trigger Shatter. On top of that, Super Crystallize gains a shield increase based on the Geo damage and the elemental damage of the absorbed element, and both Shatter and Crystallize have the improved super property buffs. Finally, using an Electro unit creates Hyper Fridge teams, which grants you access to Super Freeze, Super Hyper Bloom, and Super Superconduct. This creates incredible potential since you have a lot of bonuses to slot in, and using a heavy attacking unit sacrifices some Super Freezing for Super Shatter. Overall, in Trailblazer's case, their flexibility as a general Dendro support gives them a lot of leeway to function in teams comprised of any element, so even the non-Dendro reactions can find some place to embrace their super reaction buffs. To finish off, I'll just go through a quick overview of what we covered. Dendro Trailblazer unlocks a completely new mechanic in their teams, and a strong one at that. The way they're designed will allow for each reaction to shine in their own respective ways, as opposed to it's only giving love to specific targets. While Amplifying and Quicken have higher damage output, transformed reactions play into utility, and will have special effects to make it feel more interesting in combat. In terms of personal numbers, Trailblazer's output is at a value that I find acceptable. Initially, the pure attack scaling on their skill was abysmal, so the EM scaling I added with the A1 was enough to bring it in line with other sub-DPS units. I considered changing the burst cost, but assuming you can weave in 2 skill windows in a rotation from their C1, the extra particle generation from those 2 windows should help lower ER needs. So that's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what aspects of Dendro Trailblazer's kit you enjoyed, and what you would change. Also, let me know some of your ideas for super reaction buffs. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will see you all next time. Bye!